Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this amazing edition of Octopus Radio. We're going to start off by a little chant that we like to do and get our theme song going, and then we'll get the show started. Dave, Brian, are we ready?
Sorta.
Here we go. Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio.
Octopus Radio.
Octopus Radio.
Octopus.
Radio, the audio outreach for Octopus, which is a small bar and venue located in Cedar Falls, Iowa, 2205 College Street to be exact, just down the block from the University of Northern Iowa. My name's Dave. My wife Barb and I own Octopus and Mohair Pair, and I want to welcome you to the show tonight. And it's an exciting show, and I'm very happy at the content we're going to bring to you in the next couple hours. As always, I'm joined by my very good friends, Brian Pals, who is our DJ, and Ralph Bryant, who is our archivist. Ralph, I'll start with you. How the hell you doing? What do you have to say about tonight's show?
I really couldn't be doing better. What a wonderful day it was here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Had a chance to go out on a bike ride, and I'm getting the evening to spend with my friends. And we've got some folks who have joined us, taking the chance on a Saturday night with a couple of dudes who love music. We're going to feature the amazing Brook Strause, who is a Iowa musician straight out of Iowa City. We have people, looks like, signing in from all over the country. We're going to talk to
the world.
Yeah, and the world, yeah. We're going to talk to the infamous Bob Mehr, author of the best-selling book, Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements. Could not be more excited for him to join us tonight. And we're also going to invite again, welcome back our friend Matthew Wilson and take another look at the secret history of the Cedar Valley and its amazing music scene. Brian Pals, what's up?
Did we mention Brook Strause, one of Iowa's tremendous singer-songwriters, going to be on the program? Excited about that. I was fiddling. I may have missed the announcement. But in honor of Bob's guesting, we're going to do a little bit of the Twin Cities scene. We're going to play some Minneapolis punk rock. And of course, we're going to recognize the passing of Little Richard, the architect of rock and roll.
I spoke a little bit earlier about Little Richard and how I don't think I was terribly unusual for somebody my age. I'm 56, so my music listening really started 1970 and on. I was kind of dismissive of Little Richard. He was on the variety shows. He had wigs and makeup, and you'd see him on the summer variety shows and stuff like that. And
yeah,
more of a celebrity than probably the king of rock and roll.
Right. Yeah, he was on Hollywood Squares.
Yeah, and that's the Little Richard I knew, and I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but it wasn't until 1980 or so that I chanced upon some vinyl. I think I mentioned on Facebook that it was VJ Records' Greatest Hits. That shit's rock solid.
Yep.
And I think I still think Chuck Berry is the king of rock and roll as far as kind of, branding that everyday experience into rock and roll songs. Little Richard's everyday experience was a little more freaky.
Chuck's may have been a little freaky too.
Yeah, we know about that. But anyway, I don't always agree with Rolling Stone magazine and what they say about things. But I think a while back they listed his, I can't remember what song was the number one rock and roll song of all time. And you know what? I'd agree with that.
Where are we starting first, DJ
Well,
Pals?
let's get right to it. Keep a knocking, Little Richard. Rest in power.
Keep a knocking, but you can't come in. Keep a knocking, but you can't come in. Keep a knocking, but you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. You said you love me and you can't come in. You said you love me and you can't come in. Woo! You said you love me and you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. Woo! Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. You said you love me and you can't come in. You said you love me and you can't come in. Woo! You said you love me and you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. Woo! Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Woo! Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. You said you love me and you can't come in. You said you love me and you can't come in. You said you love me and you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. Woo!
My boy lollipop, you make my heart go giddy up. You are as sweet as candy. You're my sugar dandy. Oh, my boy lollipop, you never, never leave me, because it would grieve me. My heart told me so. I love you, I love you, I love you so. But I don't want you to know. I need you, I need you, I need you so. And I never let you go. Oh, my boy lollipop, you make my heart go giddy up. You set the world on fire. You are my one desire. Oh, my lollipop. Hey, it's Carly Wolf from the Ghost Wolves, and you're listening to Octopus Radio. Yeah!
Because everybody's gonna be there. You got people coming from
Louder, please.
DJ Powell starting off with a Little Richard.
Yeah, a couple of Little Richard songs. We finished up with Function at the Junction, one of his 1960s soul sides that he did for OK Records. He was really good in that idiom as well, you know, not just a rock and roller. He excelled at whatever he tried, a great singer, and what an influence. Everybody was influenced by this guy. James Brown, you know, another Georgia guy, was very directly influenced by him. Otis Redding, basically Little Richard's old band, the Pine Toppers, went on to become Otis Redding's band. Jimi Hendrix played with Little Richard. The Beatles learned how to scream like white women from Little Richard. You know, just directly influential on virtually everybody in rock and roll. Prior to Function at the Junction, we heard a track from Millie Small. We lost Millie Small this week. Millie Small, again, a hugely influential artist. She had the first record from Jamaica that was a big hit. And in fact, the first Caribbean record that was a big hit in 1964. My Boy Lollipop, that led to the whole ska boom. It was on Island Records actually Island Records leased it to another label, but the whole Island Records empire was based on that hit record. Chris Blackwell recorded that song and went on to record everybody. So Millie Small, rest in power.
Cool.
Oh, I guess I should mention, yeah, we started off with one of the big Little Richard hits to Keep It Knockin', a rocker.
Yeah, great set, Brian. Thanks.
Yep.
I'm not sure why I have delay all of a sudden. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Is it gone?
It's gone.
You're listening to Octopus Radio. My name's Dave. I'm here with Ralph and Brian. We're paying tribute to Little Richard. There was some talk of a toast.
Oh, yeah.
So here's to Richard. And
Yeah.
feel free to join us in this toast wherever you may be at tonight. Truly a great American, an important musician on an international level, and just somebody who needs to be recognized more for what and who he was, you know, because there's nobody who had less. I mean, if you listen to Tutti Frutti, that's rock and roll. He's taking a risk. You know, it's pretty shocking stuff even by today's standards. So,
And he was pretty too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what's coming up in just a little bit, Ralph. We're very excited to have Bob as our guest. And I don't think it's bad to say that the pandemic has a silver lining. And part of it is that we've been trapped in our homes for a couple months and we can get somebody like Bob to join us. I'm not saying he wouldn't have done it anyway, but.
Yeah. So if you've never tuned into Octopus Radio, typically we are sitting on the stage at Octopus College Hill, which is a small bar and venue located in the University of Northern Iowa district here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. We're usually spinning vinyl and talking and trying beers. With the pandemic, we've been reduced, I'll say that with a smile on my face, to doing it via Zoom. And that was the whole thing to get going. And we're really glad we did. Brian digitizes his vinyl, so you're going to hear the crackles and the pops to make it work and make it authentic for what we want to be about. And the really nice thing about this Zoom thing is we've been able to invite people. We had Jim Roth, who formerly played with Built to Spill, and Iowa legends The Hollow Men, join us from Seattle. We had our good friend Jordan Schaefer join us last Saturday from England. He's a nurse, and he was talking about his experience. Bob Mehr will be joining us from Memphis, Tennessee. And, you know, the three of us are music fans, and to say that we are huge Replacements fans would be an understatement. Bob's book is a very important piece of literature about one of the most important bands, I think, that came out of that whole time and that era, the Replacements. I was very lucky enough to just contribute a very small part of that, and that's how I met Bob. Actually, we met through some requests he made of me to help contribute to the book with some of my live Replacements collection. I think there's going to be a few guys who are going to hop on here tonight that were part of collecting those things, and I don't want to forget to mention them. We called ourselves the Matt's Taped Collective, and you'll see our names in the liner notes of that book, and that was a really big thing for us to contribute. So we really could not be more excited to have Bob come and ask him some questions about a band we deeply love, The Replacements.
It's a great book. I'm sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulties here. Great book. I own it. Great time. You know, there again, I called Little Richard a great American. The Replacements are a classic, great American rock and roll band. They certainly aren't ignored, but they don't get the attention they deserve, right? So I'm so excited to have Bob on here. And Ralph, you always have decent and interesting questions. So I'm excited to hear what you're going to ask him about The Replacements. I have a couple questions if there's time. But I want to mention that next week on Octopus Radio, Carl Alvarez, the bass player for the Descendants, is going to join us. So that's more silver lining from this shitty situation with COVID-19 and the pandemic. And we're going to talk to him about his band, the Descendants, and punk rock in general. Should we get back to some more music right now? Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, if we can cue this up, Ralph, we lost another major figure in music. It's been a bad week. A bad week. You know, we were chatting beforehand. I say each week just seems like a year these days. But we lost Florian Schneider of Kraftwerk, and again, so hugely influential. There are whole schools of music that wouldn't exist without this guy. Let's pay a little tribute by playing some Kraftwerk. We're going to play the Japanese language version of their hit Pocket Calculator. This is called Dentaku.
僕は
You are listening to Octopus Radio.
Dreaming of me. Just dreaming of me. It's only me. Just me.
All right, we started off the set in tribute to the passing of Florian Schneider of Kraftwerk. Enormously influential, like I say, whole schools of music that wouldn't exist without Kraftwerk. We could go on and on about that. And one of those schools of music is kind of that whole electropop thing. I don't think you have a band like Depeche Mode without Kraftwerk kind of paving the way for that. We just heard from Depeche Mode. On a little bit happier note, we are celebrating the 58th birthday of Dave Gahan, singer of Depeche Mode. We heard their first single from 1981, "Dreaming of Me" by Depeche Mode.
Hey, that sounded amazing, and it was good to. We started with Kraftwerk, which also sounded amazing, and as I sat and listened to that, just as you said, Brian, I thought a lot about, gosh, how much influence that sound had on so many other bands. But you ended that with Depeche Mode because of his birthday, and hopefully she's tuning in a little later tonight. But my sister has a big birthday today. I think it starts with a 5 and ends with a 0. So I'll be watching for her to hop on here because, man, that's just hard to believe. hard to believe that she is. I mean, I think she was 22 when I was born. So I'll make sure to bring that up again later.
50's nothing.
That was the salad days, 50.
Yeah, yeah, you were still kind of 40 in your mind, you know? I want to remind everybody you're listening to Octopus Radio. This is the internet extension of Octopus, a small bar and venue located in Cedar Falls, Iowa, Northeast Iowa, if you're looking at a map, just down the block from the University of Northern Iowa. We started doing this podcast a couple of years ago to have fun and drink beer and listen to music. And it's a tool for us right now to remind people, especially who live within, 20, 30 minutes of the bar, that we're still here. We're still going on and surviving this difficult period with the pandemic and all. And I would encourage, and I'm sure you all are, to think about small businesses that are near you right now. There's only so much you can do. You can get some takeout, you can do stuff like that. I think it's more of just remembering them and keeping aware that they're still there. The toughest times are coming ahead. So I really appreciate you listening to Octopus Radio tonight. And I want to mention that we tried a new program last week for the other business that my wife and I run called Mehr, and we did a record club and online sales, and that was really successful. And you could tell that people are bored shitless and need some new vinyl to listen to, and secondly, they're really eager to support small businesses. And without being gross about talking about actual numbers, I think we sold like between $400 and $500 worth of vinyl, which is fantastic.
That's amazing. I tuned in, and it was a weird and amazing feeling all at once to be on the other end of Octopus Radio. I got to hear it from my living room, which was kind of cool. I do want to mention real quickly that I know we have a lot of people that are tuning in from around the country and around the world. And Dave makes a good point about supporting a business that you feel passionate about. Earlier, as the pandemic began in Iowa, Dave put up an Octopus Survival Fund on GoFundMe, Octopus College Hill Survival Fund. And it did very well very quickly because people want to support our local venue. And if you're so inclined, hop on and do that sometime tonight just to keep live music rolling in the Cedar Valley. I hope wherever you're at, you have a place as amazing as Octopus. And if you don't, hopefully when the doors open at Octopus, we get to see you again sometime there soon, and you stop in and check it out. You won't regret it.
Yeah, we'll get back to music here in just a second. I think it's worth talking about for a minute, the future of live music. And it's not going to come back right away. And when I've talked with other small business people, like I said a few minutes ago, the toughest times are coming up in the next 6 months, is my prediction. Because it doesn't really matter what your governor or your president says. When you leave your house, you're going to make a decision whether you feel comfortable going out. We've had some ragers here at the bar with, 100 people packed together, pretty much one organism as far as passing, you know what I'm saying? And it was a great time because of that, but now we look at that a little differently. So, we're looking at some options where, and there might be a silver lining to this. Maybe we can start charging a little more for these shows. Maybe we appreciate them a little more. And maybe half of the audience will be watching at home, and maybe a smaller audience will be here at the bar. I don't know.
Yeah, no, we experimented with some video broadcasts kind of early on when we felt like we could do that in social distance, and went to Zoom when it became a little less responsible to be in the club doing that. My hope is that as we feel more comfortable, that we start to do some of those video broadcasts and figure out a way to not only support the artists, but to support clubs. And I think that could be really cool. I'm excited for what it can mean, but I'm just like everybody else. There's a long list of stuff I need to do. And Dave and I were joking earlier this week about people need a couple of things right now. They need hope, and we also need some haircuts. So hope being much higher on that list. And for me, hope is going to a show. And as you said, Dave, being part of that organism, that living, breathing audience that enjoys music and seeing it live.
I totally have my camera angle set so you cannot see my hair. It is fucking out of control, man. With the humidity going on in Iowa like it is right now, it's not even, there's no romance in it. It's just plain scary. I'm happy to have hair at 56, but there's a burden with it too. I'm super excited for what's coming up. This may be the best show we've ever done. We're going to be talking replacements in a little bit with Bob. We've got Matthew Wilson doing another Secret History of the Cedar Valley, which traces the alternative and punk roots of Cedar Falls, Iowa, and Waterloo, the Cedar Valley. And then Brook Strause, one of our favorite musicians from Iowa City, is going to be playing live via Zoom at some point in this program. Brian, what do you think? Where should we go musically?
Well, I'm going to interject. Sorry, Brian. I think our friend Matthew Wilson is on and might be ready to share some of that next segment of the Secret History of the Cedar Valley. Matthew, if you're out there, unmute yourself and join us. I think you are.
Hey, Ralph, how you doing?
Hey, it's great to see you again, Matthew. Your semester is over. I bet you're feeling good.
Well, I'm sitting here still putting in a few final grades as I listen to the show. Yeah, we, like yourself, Ralph, and for those who are tuning in for the first time, big fan of local music, live music, and in 2007, I started this project to archive the music, the underground original music of the Cedar Valley, to preserve it and just enjoy it for years to come. And so I've got 3 tracks coming up. When I first moved back to town in 2005, saw a great show by a band that was big at the time called A's Jump, which my brother Steve played bass for, and really love those guys. And I just found out today they just came out with a new album from their new home in North Carolina on Sump Pump Records in Des Moines. So they're still going strong, which is kind of cool. But I'm going to play 2 tracks from 2 of the solo projects of 2 of the members of A's Jump. We're going to hear a track from prolific songwriter and keyboardist Scott Meller and his band Imaginary Enemies. And then we're going to hear one of my personal favorites, a real gem, a track from the 2003 demo CD called The Ghost Ship Archive by A's Jump guitarist Ryan Creary. And then following that, we're going to hear a track from the Teddy Boys, who we all know and love.
Hey, this is John Chamberlain, and you're listening to Octopus Radio.
Yeah, that was the Teddy Boys with a track called Fortune Cookie. And I'll never forget seeing them play that song. First time I saw them, they were opening for a band called the Beat Strings at a club called the Reverb in downtown Cedar Falls. And I think, we were talking earlier about the future of live music. And I think, there's something to seeing a band incarnate performing a track that really brings it to life. And I remember seeing them perform that song and just thinking in my head, like, oh, these guys are good. There's something there. I can't wait to see what they do in the future. And I think that's a great example of why live music needs to continue.
I would totally agree with that, Matthew. And for the folks who are listening who may not know the folks who played in that band, Teddy Boys was a band that became a lot of other amazing Cedar Valley bands that we are enjoying to this day. One of those is a band called Sires. Another one of those is a band called Twins. And we're going to listen to a brand new Twins track later on in the show. Their brand new single that's going to come out this week. The talent that existed in that band, they played a reunion show back in November on the Octopus stage. And knowing all of the people in that band extremely well, I have never seen them have more fun at a show, period. It was a total blast. One of my favorite nights for all those performers, just because of my emotional and friend connection to all of them. What a special, special night that was. Dave, do you remember?
Yeah, I was there. It was a great night, and in a town the size of Cedar Falls, every person's important. Every person's important everywhere. But here, that band, splintered off into, Twins and Dylan Sayers. And, I'm just thinking what our contemporary alternative music scene would look like in Cedar Falls without those guys. You really can't afford to turn anyone away. And that's why we need a live music venue. And we need people who are hopefully, welcoming and helping these people get to the next place. And when I hear that track, it's a much different sound than either of those bands have right now. A lot less melody, more straight on rock. And, there's a lot more melody in all of those bands' music right now. So it's very interesting to hear. Very cool.
Yeah, totally agree. And Matthew, your Secret History of the Cedar Valley segments have really brought a new level of awesome to our show. Like I've said this a million times and I'm going to continue to say it. As someone who records live music, what you've collected and curated in your work is amazing. We're looking forward to continuing to have you be a part of this. And I'm looking forward to helping you continue that work as we think about what's been going on at the Octopus. So it's a very exciting thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ralph. And we'll see what happens for next week. We'll have to come up with some new theme.
Well, our good friend, Chris Kenline, who joined us last week, and I don't think he can make it this week, found some recordings from, what I think we've decided is the club that kind of started punk in the Cedar Valley, Dean's Parkade Lounge. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to share a few of those. So we got a message pretty late this afternoon that he had some stuff, and that's going to be really exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'll be really cool to go down that lane. And I imagine that the recordings are going to kind of sound like, Matthew, maybe you'd agree with me, how we remember them. Distorted and analog.
Yes. No,
Talked about. I'm sorry, go ahead if you had something to say, Matthew. There.
I'm looking forward to hearing some of the crowd noises and the ambient sounds as much as I am the music.
Yeah, it'll be a good journey for us. And the audio quality is changing so quickly now with, things are every 5 years, it seems like you have a new format and it's a good thing. You can pine for the old days, but the clarity we have and like Ralph's able to bring to recording bands here at Octopus with something that fits in a small suitcase that would have taken up a couple rooms 25 years ago. The good old days are great, but that's a good thing. And I support that. And we've really liked that you can hear bands now, but to be able to hear Deans like that will be a treat. And I'm looking forward to it. You're listening to Octopus Radio, the audio version, the online version of a small bar and venue in Cedar Falls, Iowa called Octopus. Man, thanks for being with us tonight. It means a lot. This has been something I look forward to since we've been in jail. We're in pandemic jail with people we love, or we used to love. I'm kidding, of course, but thank you so much for helping us promote our small business. It means everything. Like I said earlier in the program, it's about having fun, hanging out with friends, drinking beer, listening to some great music. Ralph, what are we going to do now?
Well, in just a few minutes, we're going to talk to Bob Mehr, author of the best-selling book, Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements. But I know our friend DJ Pals has some things to set that up. He curated a little set. And Brian, where would we like to go before we talk to Bob?
Well, let's listen to some Twin Cities music. This is going to be a set of very short songs because it's all kind of in this punk rock vein, except for maybe the first one. We're going to start with a very early Twin Cities rock and roll record by the Gestures from 1964, doing Run, Run, Run.
Now did you know that I didn't love you?
Dave Deibler, and you're listening to Octopus Radio.
You're gonna die 'cause you are so dumb. We don't like it 'cause you want any fun. And what's more, we hate you get stung. You're gonna lie, yeah, cry, yeah, cry. We're gonna crucify you. You're gonna die 'cause you are so dumb. We don't like it 'cause you want any fun. And what's more, we hate you get stung. You're gonna lie, yeah, cry, yeah, cry. We're gonna crucify you.
We are the sons of no one.
Crazy.
you're gonna make it after all. Um, the Twin Cities, we finished up with the anthem there, "Love Is All Around" by Husker Du. Prior to that, we heard a record that was produced by Grant Hart and Bob Mould of Husker Du. That was Otto's Chemical Lounge, the longtime Twin Cities punk band doing Jimi Hendrix's "Fire" from 1983, recorded up at Blackberry Way. Yeah, pretty interesting record. I like Otto's Chemical Lounge. The one guy from that band, Tom Hazelmeyer, went on to form the band Halo of Flies. Pretty tight-knit scene up there. So, just in honor of Bob Mehr joining us here, we're playing some Twin Cities rock and roll. Prior to Otto's Chemical Lounge, we heard what did we hear prior to Otto's Chemical Lounge, guys? My back announcing these words. No,
I got it. The Suicide Commandos.
Yeah, right. The Suicide Commandos. I misplaced the record. I don't know. I just had it out here, but the Suicide Commandos, which may well be the first punk rock record out of the Twin Cities, right? 1978. Their album, the Suicide Commandos, make a record on Blank Records. We heard Mosquito Crucifixion. And we started off with the Gestures, not really a punk rock record per se, but it's an old Twin Cities record. The Gestures on Soma Records out of Minneapolis, Run, Run, Run from 1964.
Well, thank you, Brian. Brian, if you've never listened to Octopus Radio, Brian has an amazing record collection, and as a DJ, he has an amazing talent for pulling together sets that somehow make sense and like go across time and space. And it's a pretty amazing thing. Again, if you ever have the chance to be in the Octopus when Brian is spinning, you are going to be in for a real treat. It's an absolute joy to hear him spin. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob Mehr. Bob, how's it going in Memphis, Tennessee?
It's going good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice here, and that's a great set you played. It's funny. You talked about the Minneapolis scene being kind of small in its way. I think that Gestures song, Run, 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 which is maybe cut in 64 or 5, that was actually recorded at the same studio that the Replacements recorded Tim. Which was, I think, K-Bank Studios, which was owned by Soma, which was the big, record label at the time, or distributor. And of course, Twin Tone started by aping Soma's Big Hits of Mid-America compilation. So the Replacements eventually ended up there, where like the Gestures recorded the Castaways, all that stuff. So it's a weird incestuous small scene in Minneapolis, obviously.
Well, and you just nailed why Brian Powles is a genius as a DJ. He did that on purpose. So Bob, thank you for joining us. You and I have had many years of talking about the Replacements. And you mentioned the other day when we did our test Zoom that you have a 12-year history with kind of researching this book. So that's going to bring me to my first question. How did this project start? We're so thankful it happened, but how did it start?
Well, the short version of it is I always been a big Replacements fan. I eventually became a music critic. Through that, I ended up kind of coming to know or do stories on Paul, Tommy, came to know Peter Jesperson, the Replacements original manager and Twin Tone co-founder. And the sort of my world started shrinking, in terms of like knowing some of the folks. And then around 2004, I believe, around the time of Paul's Fokker record, I went out to Minneapolis to do a magazine story on him. I had interviewed him a couple times before just on the phone. That was the first time in person. And he wasn't doing a whole lot of press on that record. He did maybe 2 or 3 interviews to promote that. And one of them was for this now defunct magazine called Harp. And we did a nice long interview in Minneapolis. At the time I was living in Chicago, so I sort of flew up for the day. And we really hit it off. We had a good interview. He was in a really sort of, I think, unusually open place at that point. He hadn't done a whole lot of press. His father had died maybe just a few months before, so he was in a kind of contemplative mood. And one thing led to another. We had a good conversation, and then I found myself in Minneapolis at that day, kind of just kicking around for the day before I had to catch my flight back to Chicago. And I ended up sort of going to the CC Club, and I went to the Uptown. And when I was at the Uptown, Bob and Tommy's mother, Anita Stinson, was tending bar, and I stopped by. I take it back. I called Peter Jesperson, who was at that point living in California, and I said, "Hey, Peter, I'm in Minneapolis. Where should I go?" And he said, I'm here. He was emptying out the old Twin Tone offices, which is actually in where the studio was, or where the Nicollet Studios. He was there with Paul Stark. And so I went over there and started looking through the files that they had, all these replacement clippings and studio logs and all that stuff. And then, I sort of hung out there for a bit, and then I went to the Uptown and saw Anita, and I had seen Paul earlier in the day, and just sort of in that day, the whole sort of replacements universe that it kind of came into focus. So I started thinking, well, that was really, there might be a book here. There's such an amazing story here in terms of what these connections are. And I kind of saw it firsthand that day. So that started a couple-year process of sort of courting the band and their management, and with the idea of doing essentially an authorized, unauthorized book, with their participation, but I didn't really have to have their approval. And so that was in 2005, 2007. I really had my first meeting with Tommy to talk about it. Shortly after that, I met with Paul to talk about it, and I was doing a piece for Spin around the time of the reissues, the 2008 Rhino reissues, and I had already sort of been asked to do some liner notes for them. So I kept getting kind of closer to the band and the members, and then it was right around there, 2008, that everybody kind of agreed. There were some other things that sort of had to be kind of sorted out between them, and then by 2009, I was working on the book. Thought it would take a year to research, a year to write. It took about 6 years to research and write, all told. And then in 2016, it came out. So I always say it took about 10 years, start to finish, from the first inception to when it came out, which is true. And then, of course, ever since then, I've been working on related projects since 2016, related replacements projects. So it continues on ever more.
Well, thank you. I remember, for those who don't know me, in my day job, I am an elementary principal, and I was sitting in my office about the time you were working on those Rhino reissues, and I got an email from you requesting some tracks that I had up on a website of something
Right.
traded for. And I remember responding to that email and say, hey, the email said something like, hey, we're working on these reissues. I'd love to talk to you about some stuff you have that we don't. And I responded because it was summer and I had some free time, and I essentially said, give me a call. And within minutes, Bob was on the other end of the phone. And
that's right.
And so I was thrilled to help with that project. And I remember you kind of mentioning that could be a thing back then. And knowing kind of the replacements and how they view their history, or, depending on how you caught them before the book came out, they may have looked back on that and not been impressed, or had been very nostalgic, depending on when you caught them. What was the hardest part of getting the research done with the band? I mean, I can see them having almost a curmudgeon-like attitude towards their history because it's legendary.
Well, that really was the thing. I think I just, some of it was persistence on my part. Some of it was kind of getting to know Peter Jesperson, getting to know Darren Hill, Paul's manager, and kind of connecting with them, and through them connecting with Paul and Tommy. But I think a lot of it was just the timing of, when the replacements, their career was over essentially as a band in 1991. Immediately after that, both Paul and Tommy and, Chris, everybody kind of went on to solo careers or different bands. And, the replacement was not foremost on their mind. It was something they were trying to almost shed at that point and kind of move on with their lives. So there wasn't a whole lot of looking back. And then I think when Bob Stinson died in 1995, it almost made it harder to look back because it was a sort of tragic event in the middle of that. But I think, 10, 12, 13, 14 years later, by 2007, 8, 9, when I really started working on it, I think enough time had passed from the end of the band and from Bob having passed, and, Paul and Tommy getting into their 40s and 50s, which is sort of a natural point where, they were ready and willing and able to kind of start the process of looking back, and not being the most sentimental guys or really wanting to kind of revisit that stuff. It was tough at first, but I think that's why ultimately they agreed, and why they were willing to kind of go through the journey with me was, it was just the right time. I don't think the Replacements' career was almost so kind of breakneck from the time they formed at the end of 79 till they broke up in 91. There's 8 albums, so many tours, so much drama and adventure in between, that by the time they were done with the band, it was just like, okay, let's move on to the next thing. And then that next decade and a half, they were trying to make their own lives. And so really it wasn't maybe till almost 20 years after the band was done that they could kind of really stop and look back. And sort of fortunately, I happened to be there at that time saying, hey, let's do this.
So I would agree. I think you were in the right place at the right time, which we are very thankful for. You call the book The True Story of the Replacements, and it is one that makes you laugh, and there's moments that are almost tearful. They're so such a train wreck at some moments. But what was your favorite part? What were some of the favorite stories from the research that you remember? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no,
You
I
tell
mean,
me. You have 12 years in this, and you can answer any question.
well, I mean, for me, a lot of it was kind of understanding the story. You know, the Replacements aren't a band that was, on some level, they weren't a mystery. I mean, they were a press darling. They were written about. They were on covers of magazines, big features, and and then they were, their history had been written about to a great extent. And yet, my sense was, as much as had been written about them, there was still a lot of questions. It was always, these guys were wild, they were crazy, they self-sabotaged, they did this, they did that, but never really, I never really felt there was like a proper explanation for the things they did. And my guess was, and I realized it pretty quickly as I started working on the book, that there was a lot more to the kind of early years and the foundational period of the band that would explain why their career went the way they did, and why they were so good, and why they sort of hit certain walls or ceilings. And a lot of that story for me was kind of getting into the early roots, childhood of the Stinsons, Paul's background and his years before the Replacement, and trying to also understand the context of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis music scene at that time, in the sort of late 60s through the late 70s to where the band formed. And so a lot of my research was really kind of digging around, sometimes, with laser focus, sometimes just fumbling around, trying to find like where the kind of roots of things were, and sort of pull those up and try and figure out how it all related to the bigger picture. So, it was a lot of, like finding Bob Stinson's record of his juvenile years when he was in state schools and group homes and all that kind of stuff, or talking to Paul about his early years before the Replacements, because he was in any number of bands, was playing for many years before sort of the Replacements came along. So it was kind of understanding the formative years, which is a funny thing, because as a reader, usually in rock and roll books, those are kind of the most boring parts. Not always, but in some cases, those early years are sort of like, oh, you're just trying to get to that till they form the band or start their career. But in the Replacements case, it was pretty interesting stuff, and pretty central to who they were and what their story was, and how it unfolded. So in a weird way, most of the real kind of labor that I had to do was trying to understand the years leading up to the Replacements.
Yeah. Dave.
Firstly, Bob, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. It means a lot. I've read your book twice.
Oh, thank you.
I don't expect you to have an exact answer for this, but I was mowing my lawn earlier today thinking about this interview. The Replacements, to me, one of the amazing aspects of that band is they went from like Stinks to like songs like I Will Dare and Kiss Me on This. And as far as I know, nobody I hung out with ever gave them any shit for that. You know what I mean? There's something there. There's some commitment. They're almost like a different band, but there's this undertow of the Replacements, this sonic energy that not many bands have. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Replacements career is pretty neatly sort of divided. You got the 4 records on Twin Tone as an independent record, 4 records on Warner Brothers as a major label band, and almost 4 and 4 with Bob and without Bob Stinson. But I mean, the only thing you can really compare it to go from Sorry Ma and Stink to Sadly Beautiful on All Shook Down, that kind of evolution really of any band in that condensed period of time, basically a decade. It sounds silly to say, is the Beatles, where they're doing I Want to Hold Your Hand, and by the end you've got the stuff that's on the later Beatle records. It really is. It's pretty incredible when you look at it, and I think that's actually part of the reason why they have remained so fresh and relevant. Is you can almost tap in at any point of their catalog, and different kinds of music fans there's some people that don't like anything past Stink. They like Sorry Ma and Stink, or maybe Hootenanny. And there are some people that really just sort of were exposed to them and love those middle period records, Let It Be, Tim, Pleased to Meet Me. And then there are some people that really love Don't Tell a Soul, and even kind of singer-songwriter people who love All Shook Down. And yet, it's the same band essentially all the way through, and the same spirit that kind of goes through it. And yet the music, I mean, I always joke, is like, the guy who wrote Gary's Got a Boner also wrote Sadly's Beautiful within the period of a few years. So I think that's also what makes them such an important and really great band is, not that there's anything wrong with the Ramones and sort of making the same record, 15 times over, but the Replacements really did evolve as musicians, as people. And I think when you're invested in that story of a band and how they sort of grow and change, and the audience grew and changed, I think, with them to a certain extent, you lose some people and you gain some other people in that process. I just think that catalog is so rich, and the band's history is so rich. And yet, like you say, there's something consistent all the way through, even though the music often sounds very different from album to album.
I think you touched on something, Bob. They grew so much in their career. And as someone who spent a lot of time with some great friends collecting as much of those live recordings as we could get our hands on, I would argue that evolution really showed up in their live show. And the Replacements are, in my opinion, the world's greatest cover band because of Peter Jesperson and their love of 70s AM radio. And I having seen Paul on pretty much every tour since Don't Tell a Soul, having seen him play with a band, play solo, I mean, so many different ways. I remember being at, he played a festival in Louisville, Kentucky, and I went with some of the guys who are listening tonight. And he launched into Kentucky Rain by Elvis Presley. And, and like, it was the most heartfelt cover of that song. I mean, and the crowd didn't get it. The gal sitting next to me kind of was like, what's about to happen here? And even made some comment under her breath, but just any band that can cover that wide spectrum of music live, like that somebody screams out on a moment's notice, like incredible depth as a live band. And as you know, sometimes amazing, sometimes terrible. Was the legend as big as what people said it was in terms of their terrible live shows?
I think that tends to get a little over exaggerated. I mean, I don't know if you broke it up in terms of, I mean, you have so many of the shows, but if you broke it up over the course of their career, I mean, I think really none of that really started until probably 2-3 years into their career. The first couple 3 years, they were so young, so fresh, so they were an opening act. They couldn't really mess around. So they were just like trying to play and play well. And there was still a kind of struggle even in that, which was kind of why people always rooted for them. I think it wasn't probably until a few years in, until end of 83, beginning of 84 into 85, that the really crazy cover sets happened. And then by the time, there was maybe a 1.5, 2 year period of that. And then even when that was kind of over, the legend lingered. And I think by the time Slim came into the band, they were a different kind of thing. But in a way, even though Slim Dunlap was a more grounding influence, it also allowed them to sort of be even wilder in a sense, because they knew somebody who would be there to sort of ground things. So I think some of the legend of like how terrible they were is exaggerated. If they were a terrible band 90% of the time, nobody would care about them live. I think the truth is they were great most nights, and they were always interesting. And that's the main thing, that even when they weren't good some people said, as a friend of mine said, I went and saw a Replacement show. Well, I can't remember exactly what year it was. It was the best show and the worst show I ever saw, which is kind of the perfect description in the course of one night. And but they were never uninteresting, and I think that's probably why people sort of hold them in such high regard as a live band, because it wasn't the same sort of thing every night after night. There was an element of risk and an element of danger in seeing them and what they might sound like.
I would second what Bob's saying. I ended up in Minneapolis in late 81. So I would be at the Duffy's era shows.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They would do Hitchin' a Ride, and it was serious. They were trying to play that song very well. And then we would see, they would play Duffy's, which was a great, comfortable venue, a little less pressure than the Entry as far as and it's nothing against the Entry and First Ave, great place, but there's a little more social pressure at that club. Duffy's was a very working class joint. Ellie
Right.
was there, and they would also play like every other Tuesday at the Caboose for free, and there would be a case of beer sitting on the stage, which I assume was their payment. And they would be working out songs, and it was fucking fascinating, man. You know, it's just. And I worked at McDonald's in Nicollet Mall, and I would tell my coworkers, "You got to go see this band." Well, the next day, the consensus was it was just noise. Come back with me, and I have to thank my friend Chris, who recently passed away. He's like, "You got to go see this fucking band. You're gonna love them," and I did. And they, I think, what is Bill, the sound guy's book, Lemon Prison?
Right.
Lemon Jail.
I'm
I
jail.
think joke covers came from the boredom and the hostility of being trapped in the lemon prison. You know, those songs, that era of replacements when I left town to move to Lincoln, Nebraska didn't exist yet. You know, they didn't get that drunk until afterwards. They were very polite. You know what I mean? When I would read interviews and articles, I was kind of like, who are these guys? It wasn't the band I had known in person and seen shows. So I think that came from the grind of having a music, career.
That's true. I mean, they were Paul primarily, but I think all of them were quick to boredom, and so they would do stuff. But the essence of what they are, it's a funny thing in terms of the period that they came up in. I noted in the book, but Paul had a friend who actually was the original singer that he brought into the replacements that he edged out, sort of. This guy Tom Byrne, and his father owned a bowling alley, and in this bowling alley they would have a jukebox, and every so often, as Paul was like 8 or 9, him and his friend Tom Byrne would get the discarded singles from this bowling alley's jukebox, and it was all the kind of early 70s stuff you would expect, Partridge Family and Jackson 5 and all that stuff, and a lot of that stuff became the covers that the replacements did. And Bob, in the same way, Bob Stinson, he was also a big listener of probably more classic rock after a certain point. I mean, people always talk about his Yes fixation, which is very true, and with Steve Howe, but Johnny Winter was everything to him, and he listened to a lot of classic rock. And these were guys who really, basically their only sort of access was whatever was on the radio, whatever was on TV in the late 60s, early 70s. And then you add, so it's a lot of that era's covers. Like when you look at the things they covered, even Hitchin' a Ride and things like that, which I think Hitchin' a Ride the riff of that had a big influence on Can't Hardly Wait. It's a lot of stuff from their childhoods. And then later there was another strain of music brought in through Peter Jesperson in terms of the records he was exposing them to. So that was another sort of avenue of things they would cover. So it was a really interesting kind, and then of course Paul sort of found punk rock and kind of they brought that to what they were doing, and also like things like Dave Edmunds and sort of kind of pub rock stuff. So it's this weird mix of things from their childhood, things that were sort of prevalent when they were coming up in the 70s, early 70s in Minneapolis, the sort of influence of pub rock, punk rock, and then this kind of record store owners or record store clerks kind of collection in terms of Peter's stuff. And so that's ended up being kind of not only what they covered, but in a way what their influences became and what they ended up sounding like. So it's a really interesting swirl and mix of stuff that kind of determined what it was the replacements did.
I'm really glad you mentioned Peter Jesperson. Peter, who I've never actually met face to face, but I've spoken to many times, is an unbelievably nice guy and someone who curated a lot of, as you said, their later interest in music. He's, his holding of kind of the legacy of the replacements was in his hands for all those years that they didn't care. And I think Peter Jesperson is a really central figure. Years ago, I was looking for some really hard to find Tommy song. And somehow I was talking to him via email, and would you believe he said, "Hey, I got one more copy of this. It's coming your way." That's a great example of the kind of guy I think Peter Jesperson truly is, that he just shared it with me. So Bob, in addition, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, Peter, I always say this, and I said this publicly. We did an event around the time of the book tour at a really amazing event that KEXP in Seattle put on, and they had this whole replacements, like almost museum display of all this stuff, because the program director at KEXP is a old First Avenue DJ, Kevin Cole, and we were on stage, and I said, really, and I say this often too about having done this, been a music critic for a number of years and researched bands. It's like the artist is the focal point. They're the ones that do it. But, you know, there's a lot of talent that languishes without the people behind the scenes, without the Peter Jespersons of the world, without people like Terry Katzman, who passed away, who was a kind of the Peter Jesperson for Husker Du, and who worked at Orfolk where Peter worked. And it's like, in the Replacements case, it's probably more true than almost with any other band, that if they had not found not only someone, but found specifically Peter, who sort of believed in music and rock and roll the way sort of people believe in religion, you know, it was a passion and it was so important to him. If the Replacements hadn't had somebody like that when they found him, I truly believe they would not have lasted more than a few months. I mean, it would have fallen apart for them. And I don't know what would have happened. People speculate, well, Paul would have been a songwriter, he would have been a success. Yes, and that's true. But that thing that we all love, the Replacements, would not exist the way it was if not for Peter. I mean, the Replacements more than anyone needed somebody like that. I mean, the joke always was, nobody in the Replacements had a driver's license, so how could they even get to the gigs? You know, so I, you know, even beyond the sort of baseline logistical things, I think having somebody who kind of believed in them, people who had probably really never had any encouragement in their life, quite frankly, at that time, and who was the right person at the right time, you know, again, they wouldn't have lasted. I mean, I'm convinced of that. They would not have lasted through the 1980, and there would be no Replacements without Peter.
And thank God for Peter, for a million reasons. Bob, if you have a few more minutes, I did pull a couple of songs from some of the projects that I think have happened as a result of this book. I'd like to play a few of those.
Sure.
And then come back and talk for a few more minutes if you're good. And I know you're tasting a whiskey that we all
Yeah.
need to know about. That's a big part of what we do on the show. So
Fair enough.
ironically, Dave and Bob, I pulled up Hitchin' a Ride because I thought it would be a great one to play that really kind of shows what the Replacements were as a live band. So here we go. This is Hitchin' a Ride from the Live at Maxwell's For Sale set.
Got no fare to ride a plane. Sounded lonely, so I'm on my way. Hitching a ride, hitching a ride. We've been away too long from my baby's side. And I'm gonna slide, gotta be still one help on me. Hitching a ride, ooh, hitching a ride. I've been away too long. You keep me satisfied. Ride, 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 hitching a ride. Ride, 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 hitching a ride. Sun goes up, a car goes by, and nobody ever help but die. Hitching a ride, hitching a ride. I've been away too long from my baby's side. Ride, 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 hitching a ride. Ride, ride, hitching a ride.
Hi, it's Jody Stevens with Big Star and Those Pretty Wrongs. So we're here at Ardent in the Garden, and you were listening to Octopus Radio.
Hello, and we back. Thank you, Milwaukee. Okay, we'll start this. Alex Shelton. Oh, if you was from Venus, would it feed us with a spoon? If you was from Mars, then that'd be cool. Is that around on campus? Would it stab us in a fire? Hanging out in Memphis all the while. Children by the million, never Alex children. Come around, let's get out in love. What's that song? Yeah, I'm in love with that song. So if you rape and pillage in the village of his choice, visible man would be seen without a visible voice. Feeling like $100, exchanging good lucks face to face. Checking your stats out of trash up St. Mark's Place. And 103, children by the million, but Alex should come around to have me love. Yeah, but that song, ooh, I'm in love. I can't be wrong. I never travel far without a little picture. Ooh. Right around the house, big kid house, tarot card. Fall asleep with a pop-up video on. But if you was so famous, would it feed us with a spoon? If he was to die, then I don't care because children by the million, Alex should come around. Say I'm in love with that song. Yeah, I'm in love. What's that song? Yeah, I'm in love with that song. I'm in love. Can't go wrong. What I say? Whoa, let it go.
All right, those were two songs from projects that I believe happened as a result of Bob's work on Trouble Boys. The first one was Hitchin' a Ride, a great Vanity Fair cover by the Replacements from the Live at Maxwell's in Hoboken, New Jersey. And then the second being the Incarcerated full show that showed up as part of Dead Man's Pop, a kind of reworking of the great Don't Tell a Soul record. Actually, we finally got to hear that record for what it was really supposed to sound like, which was pretty amazing. And that's kind of the question that I wanted to ask Bob, you know, like, did those projects result because of the book or happen because of your work?
In a sense, I mean, obviously, kind of working with the band over a number of years and researching it, one of the things that sort of ended up happening is I kind of started to dig through the archives of things at Warner Brothers and at Twin Tone to a certain extent, and kind of was looking at, you know, really just doing an assessment of what was there. Some of it was more for my informational purposes in terms of the book. But at a certain point when the band was in the midst of their reunion, probably around 2015, end of 2014, beginning of 2015, they were kind of like, well, you've been going through all this stuff. You know, what's there? And so Tommy and Paul and I and their managers I went up to Minneapolis, and we kind of went through everything, both audio and video, in terms of what was there and what could be done maybe with some of the things that were unreleased. The Maxwell's record was had been intended to be a live record released after Tim. For whatever reason, part of the thing was they recorded it. By the time they wanted to kind of start maybe putting it out or do something with it, Bob had left the band, so the band wasn't kind of the same as had been on the recording, so it sort of got shelved. But it was obviously, as anybody who's heard it, is a pretty incredible capturing of the band with Bob. And it was a multi-track recording, 24 tracks recorded at Maxwell's by the FNL mobile unit. So that had always been there. And I think in 2008, when the Replacements reissues came out on Rhino, there was some thought of, we'll put these records out and maybe try and do something with some of this other material in terms of an archival dig or whatever. The regime at Rhino changed, so all that went away. Long story short, anyway, by 2015, 2016, there was enough kind of interest and revival because of the Replacements reunion that we were able to start doing this project. So we did Maxwell's because that was an easy one. It had been, put together, mixed, ready to go. We put it out in the fall of 2017, about a year or so after the book first came out, but shortly after it had come out in paperback. And so it kind of just made sense. I mean, for a band that had built its reputation on their live performances and were so regarded as a live act, for there to have never been a really good official live album. I mean, Shit Hits the Fans was fine, but it wasn't, it was just a kind of cassette recording. It sort of made sense to start with that. But of course, everything with the Replacements is difficult. I mean, if I'd had my druthers, we would have sort of just announced a big reissue campaign and we're going to start doing these things every few years. But it really was testing the waters to see, like, what was the interest like? What was the sort of, was there a desire to kind of keep doing these things? And frankly, Maxwell's was such a success in terms of sales and response that it became very clear that we would be able to do something a little bit more ambitious. And one of the things that I had really wanted to do, it was a desire of mine after researching the book, was to get the real version of Don't Tell a Soul out. As it happened, some of the, Matt Wallace had produced that record, but was not really allowed to mix the record. And he had tried to do a quick mix of the record towards the end of the sessions, which was basically forgotten and had been stolen by the band and kind of spirited away by Slim Dunlap. And it was sitting in his basement for many years. And his wife, Chrissy Dunlap, one day said, I found this stuff. So, what is it? And I brought the tapes back to Memphis, and it turned out it was this kind of early mix of the record. And my reaction, even though it was quick, Matt did it all in one day, was like, wow, this is a very different record than what had been released and mixed by Chris Lord-Alge, which, again, was fine and it served its purpose, but was very, I think, fixed in a time and place in terms of the mix aesthetic and some of the technical aspects. And really some of the choices that were also made in terms of what he left on and what he took off. I mean, the Replacements on Don't Tell a Soul really worked to make a certain kind of record, but that record never had really come out. So after a couple of years, on the back of Maxwell's, I felt like, well, we could be a little bit more ambitious with this. So that's where Dead Man's Pop came about. We knew we had a live show from 1989, another great multi-track show, which was Incarcerated, which 4 or 5 tracks had come out. Here's a whole show. We've got these Bearsville recordings from the band, which is, they started making the record in Bearsville with Tony Berg. Only a couple of those tracks had come out. So we've got that stuff, but really the sort of emphasis of the package was letting Matt Wallace sort of complete the mix that he had started in 1988. And, it's a weird thing because people have heard that record for 30 years and many people love that. I mean, it was the Replacements' biggest selling album. And for many people, it was their first big, it was the biggest exposure for the band at that point. They were on MTV, they were on radio. And so people do like that record and some people love that record. And I do too, in a way. But for me, it was very clear that the Dead Man's Pop mix, Matt's real mix of that, was a very different record and much more of a Replacements record than anything, than the version that had been out. So my goal was to kind of get that out. So yeah, I mean, I've been trying to sort of just kind of get stuff out. It's really from a fan perspective. It's like, as a fan, what is it that I want to hear? Well, I want to hear live at Maxwell's. I want to hear the band with Bob Stinson in their glory recorded well on a 24-track, mobile unit. So we put that out. And then what else is there? Well, there's Dead Man's Pop. There's this version of, what is probably in some ways their most maligned or most controversial record, at least because of the mix. So let's go back to the version that the band wanted to release. And so we've done that. So hopefully, both of those things have been relative successes, and hopefully we'll get to do more. But it's really just a question of, for me, it's like, I think the Replacements fan base, as rabid as it is, has kind of been underserved in terms of reissues or archival things. And so we're trying to do that while there's still a music business, I suppose.
I want to thank Bob Mehr for joining us. He's the author of Trouble Boys, concerning the Replacements, an awesome band that we're talking about tonight. Octopus Radio is the internet extension of Octopus, which is a small bar and venue located in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us on Zoom tonight. We really appreciate that. This is archived tomorrow over at mixlr.com, Spotify, and Apple Music. The thing about the Replacements, Bob, that I'd like to talk about briefly is I think you can find the successful Replacements are REM. The bands were, like Friends early. And, if you're like a manager of a band, you have to have the hit, at least one hit. I think Bruce Springsteen's management was huge on that even if it doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of your material, but you have to have a hit. In 25 years, what are we going to say about the Replacements? Where are they going to fall in this? Is it going to grow, or is it going to flatline? What do you think?
I think it's going to grow. I mean, I think I've seen even in the last few years, and not that but they sort of primed the pump with the reunion. And I think the thing that sort of bodes well for the Replacements is they keep generating new fans. There's nothing about them that I think is, for the most part, stuck in any era, stuck in anything. And again, we talk about that diversity of their catalog from the first record to the last. I think, they have something that appeals to all different kinds of music fans, and they really have been generating and regenerating their fan base, particularly over the last, 5-6 years. I mean, I see it because I see sort of what their numbers are on Spotify and sort of streaming services. And it's been growing exponentially. And in some ways, you look at what they did in the reunion, they're playing baseball stadiums and tennis stadiums and things like that. And it's not all old fans. It's not all people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. It's people in their teens and 20s who are kind of tapping into the band. So I think the future for them really bodes well, because I think the catalog is really strong. And in a way, because they didn't have a hit, they're not fixed. They're not defined by a single hit or a single song, or a single era of music. I mean, yes, they existed in the 80s, really from the tail end of the 70s to the early 90s, but I think they're pretty timeless. And I think that's what makes them special. And I think that's what will keep them sort of fresh and ongoing, in the years to come.
Bob, I want to thank you for your work. As someone who was touched by the Replacements bug pretty early in his life and has literally been riding that wave since that first show I got to see, and every hair on my neck stood up the entire time. Your dedication to this band and their legacy, and as you just said, your work to continue to promote just the amazing catalog and their impact on music, I cannot thank you enough for that. There are so many people who are so thankful you told this story. So my last question. Oh, go ahead.
I appreciate that. The funny thing is the Replacements, they're wonderful guys. The one thing they're not is the best stewards of their own legacy. So, to and even in a small way, kind of be part of pushing them to sort of like kind of do that has been really rewarding. And the music deserves it. The band deserves it. So, if I can do anything to sort of kick them in the ass and make sure that they, value what they do. They're self-effacing guys. So
why do you think fans were so obsessed? In a nutshell, why were they so obsessed?
It would take a book to explain that, and there is a book for that, but it's called Trouble Boys. No, man, it's something somebody described it early. Tommy actually described it to me early. When you talked about their very early shows, 1980, 1981, he said, we struggled in a way to play our instruments. We were still learning, we were doing it, but we had a certain energy, and people almost rooted for us. I think they're a relatable band. They were a relatable band at the time, and they remain a relatable band. And I think it's part of why the book was successful is because, most rock and roll stories, unless you're really talking about just obscure artists that nobody's ever heard of, most rock and roll stories, there's no danger or risk in it. It's like, bands become successful, they become drug addicts, they have problems, but in the end of most bands that you write about or you hear about, they had hit records, they were successful, they had mansions, they had all this stuff. Replacements never really had that. And they never really wanted that. And so I think they're much more relatable on a kind of fundamental level than most quote unquote rock stars. And I think that's why they're so compelling still. And it's because they're it's the whole thing of, they're lovable losers, but it's more than that. They're a band that beyond, the great music and the great shows and the great stories, they're the kind of band that touches people in a very specific kind of way, and they're on a lot of bands like that, and part of it's because you root for them and you want them to succeed despite themselves, and part of it's because they never got their due, and part of it's because we the four of us and the certain segment of the audience sort of connects with those songs the same way that some people connect with the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or the Clash. I mean, I think they're on that level in terms of the way people regard them. So I think they're just, there's only so many bands that people feel that way about, and almost none of them are kind of at that sort of cult level that the Replacements are. So I think they're just a unique phenomenon.
I agree. Bob, thank you so much. But before we let you sign off, what are you drinking?
I am drinking let's see if you can see it here. It is a bourbon from Kentucky called Noah's Mill. There's a group of, it's a bourbon from Kentucky. There's a group called the Bardstown Distilling Group, I believe, which is just outside of Lexington. They do it's kind of the Willett family of bourbons, but this is a really amazing bourbon. They do some other ones called Rowan's Creek, some sort of small batch things, and this is sort of a small batch thing that I really like, both for like old fashions and just to sort of drink on the rocks. And so I ventured to their distillery many years ago. There's kind of in the same way that there's wine country in California, there's a kind of bourbon trail where you can go visit the distilleries and things like that in and around Kentucky. And so there's some really amazing places you can go see and distilleries you can go visit. And this is one of the good ones, Noah's Mill.
Bob, thank you so much for everything, for joining us, for this wonderful book, for everything you've done to put this audio out in the world. My friend, I appreciate it greatly. Dave.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for letting me be a guest tonight.
You bet.
Cheers. And if you're ever in Cedar Falls, Iowa, stop into Octopus and we'll buy you.
If we're ever able to travel again, Cedar Falls will be the first place I go. I'm going to go to the Octopus and we're going to have a beer. How about that?
We do that. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
We appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Hey, coming up shortly on our show, we're going to have Brook Strause from Iowa City, Iowa. He's going to perform a couple songs with us. And if you know Brooks, he's an amazing talent. If you don't, I hope you stick around and you become a fan. DJ Pals, where should we head before we talk to Brooks?
Well, I think Brooks had a few requests lined up. Should we get to should we go back to the Twin Cities?
I think we should Brooks's songs.
Yeah.
Revisit the Twin Cities so we can set the tone for his. He had some pretty specific requests.
Yeah, right. This is kind of funny because one of his requests was a Warren Zevon song, and I actually had a Warren Zevon song a different one that I was going to play tonight. So, yeah, let's go with that. Warren Zevon, My Shit's Fucked Up.
Well, I went to the doctor. I said I'm feeling kind of rough. Let me break it to you, son. Your shit's fucked up. I said my shit's fucked up. Well, I don't see how. He said the shit that used to work won't work now. rock so well. Now it's all fucked up. It's shot to hell. Yeah, my shit's fucked up. It has to happen to the best of us. The rich folks suffer like the rest of us. It'll happen to you. Grace sort of passed you by. You wake up every day and you start to cry. You wanna die, but you just can't quit. Let me break it on down. It's the fucked up shit. My shit's fucked up. Fucked up.
The door, it's time again to leave you. I miss you more each time I go away. If there's a chance, I'll swim back home to please you and post a line to reach you every day. Wake up and let me see the smile upon your face. Let's linger for a while upon our last embrace. Give me just a thought to wear. I'll still think of it quick before I dare to leave the place. Even though my outlook may astound you, no need to let your spirits fade or die. Now you must face the problems that surround you. Your star has claimed the right to light the sky. Wake up and let me see the smile upon your face. Let's linger for a while upon our last embrace. Give me just a thought to wear. I'll still think you're there quick before I dare to leave the place. Though my short profession ties me down here, it seems so long to dry your many tears. You're so afraid of crying that I won't hear your sad young voice still ringing in my ears. Wake up and let me see the smile upon your face. Let's linger for a while upon our last embrace. Give me just a thought to wear. I'll still think you're there quick before I dare to leave the place. Ooh, wake up, unlock the door.
My name is Matt, and you are listening to Octopus Radio. Salute.
All right, straight out of the Quad Cities, the Multiple Cat, by request of our guest, Brook Strause, the Multiple Cat with The Other World. Prior to that, one I really like, Roy Wood, Wake Up, from his Boulders LP. Roy Wood, if you don't know Roy Wood, learn about Roy Wood. Roy Wood, founder of a couple of the great bands of rock and roll, The Move and Electric Light Orchestra. And we started off the set with My Shit's Fucked Up, Warren Zevon. Once again, all three of those songs by request of our guest, Brook Strause.
I love Warren Zevon. Excuse me. It's tough to listen to that era of songs because he is so brutally truthful about what's happening in his life, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Always was. He's done.
You know, speaking of the great rock and roll books, there is an excellent book. I've forgotten the title of it, but Warren Zevon's son wrote a book about him that is just devastating. It is, in a league with Bob Mehr's Trouble Boys in being something that'll bring tears to your eyes.
When you say devastating, just not a great experience for him as a son. That Warren died.
It's not a memoir per se. It really is a pretty objective biography. Warren had substance abuse and just problems, and so from that perspective. But no, it really doesn't get into what it's like being Warren Zevon's son, which couldn't have been no picnic.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm just want to say one more time how amazing it was to have Bob come on the show. He has dedicated a great chunk of his life to one of the great American rock and roll bands, The Replacements. What an exciting thing. She was listening a little earlier, and I think she had to hop off, but I do want to just give a quick shout out to my sister, Kim. Today is her 50th birthday. In my house, I could go to any show as long as my big sister took me, and one of those shows was my first Replacement show. And it was a life-changing experience. Holy cow, that was an amazing show at the Paramount Theater in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And we met Mr. Slim Dunlop after the show, and I will never forget that. Thank you, Kim. Dave.
We have a sister like Kim.
Say it again.
We all need a sister like Kim.
Oh, thank you.
Somebody else was posting that there. I'm sorry, was I breaking up a little bit?
Yeah.
I was just saying, thank God for sisters and brothers like Kim. And somebody was posting on Facebook earlier that an uncle had passed away who took them to a lot of shows. And, those are the people that make that stuff happen when you're at that impressionable young age. You need somebody like that to safely take you to a show, or at least pretend to safely take you to a show. And that means a lot. So it's great that she could stop by. I do want to remind everybody that Brook Strause is coming up in just a second. We're going to open his mic. And I want to thank you for listening to Octopus Radio, which is our online pandemic version of Octopus, which is a small bar located in Cedar Falls, Iowa. If you're ever in Northeast Iowa, we demand that you stop by and have a drink with us and tell us that you listen to Octopus Radio. That would be fantastic. I also want to quickly promo that Mohair Pear, my wife Barb and I's other business, is doing the Mohair Pear Record Club and online sale again on Wednesday, May 13th. And this is primarily for people who live close to where I'm speaking from right now. And we play 2 hours of vinyl that's available at Mohair Pear for sale. And I know we just ordered a bunch of stuff, so there should be some more interesting things. The first one was very successful. So please join us, if nothing else, to hear 2 hours of great music. Let's talk about Brook Strause.
Hey, Brooks, I think you're out there. Do you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
How's the pandemic treating you? Are you going it alone? Do you have some people where you're at?
Me and my partner Angie are pretty much just holed up in our house and making a lot of music and a lot of art.
Maybe look like for 5 or 6 new records here in the next month or so?
So our project Spectral Snake is really close to being done with our LP, and that's been most of the focus for the pandemic time, and I'm really excited about it. It's sounding really good. We'll probably be done in about a week.
We are excited about that too, Brooks. I think it looks like you have a great setup there, and you probably have a couple songs you want to play us. Take it away.
Meet me in the woods with a thick black rope to bind us. The wild animals will find us, that is just. You'll wear a Sunday dress and I'll wear a suit of armor. We will go where the air's warmer, there robust. Pair of dice thrown by a desperate hand. Yeah, we do what we can. Meet me in the wood, meet me by the lake. Come with several hits of blotter. Life will return to the water, that is right. You'll speak with the dead, I'll play a game against the spirit. I will face it and not fear it, but it might. Pair of dice thrown by a desperate hand. Yeah, we do what we can. Meet me at my home and I will tell you of the future. And if it's time to remove the sutures, that is fine. Follow me upstairs, it'll only take a couple hours. There will be no more falling towers after mine. Pair dice thrown by a desperate hand. Yeah, we do what we can. So I haven't been playing my solo stuff very much. So I kind of just picked a couple easy old classics and decided to play them on the banjo so they'd be a little harder to play. So I don't believe life is precious. I don't believe life is good. Show me a man who wouldn't stab his best friend for a buck, and I will show you a million who would. And all over the world, the golden bullshit is piled high. Ignorant dreams cut crooked lines through the sky. But they'll fall, they'll fall. The buildings all will fall. And we'll find ourselves in a garden, not even knowing we were ever lost at all. I do believe there is an answer that I don't believe we deserve. All are reluctant to think or to speak or to act, but all are endlessly eager to serve. And the man upstairs thinks that he is more important than you, because he has the privilege of deciding what other people can and cannot do. But he'll fall, he'll fall. The masters all will fall. And we'll find ourselves in a garden, not even knowing we were ever lost at all. And the school is a prison, as an office is a tomb. You don't get any last supper, just go to your room. Hearts, guts, feet and fingers, we're all built to roam, but they won't tell you that no, they don't want you going home. So just keep your eye out for carrots on strings. And listen very carefully when that fat fucker sings. And then we'll fall, the human race will fall. And we'll find ourselves in a garden, not even knowing we were ever lost at all. We will fall, we will fall. The human race will fall, and we'll find ourselves in a garden, not even knowing we were ever lost at all.
Brooks, that sounds wonderful. We were just
Thank you.
talking in the chat about listening to you sing and listening to you perform really makes us sad to be at the Octopus. But man, that sounded so good. That hit us right where we needed.
Thank you.
What are some of the most, you've played at Octopus so many times and put on so many legendary shows. What's your favorite thing about playing at the Octopus?
Oh man, it's just like the best venue I think that I've ever played at, as far as like how they treat people. Like Dave always makes sure that, like, I don't know, I always get the feeling that he's treating me the way that he wishes he was treated when he was, playing shows all over the place all the time. Like, I don't know, like it's a welcoming place. It's a place that like values artists in a way that you don't see very much at all.
I think Brooks' point is very valid, where as somebody used to tour, most clubs treat you well, but occasionally you'll roll into some place and they act like you're the enemy. It's like, wait a minute, you booked us. Why why are you, you know, you don't have to kiss anybody's ass, but just be polite and honor the agreement that you made. And Brooks nearly made me cry there, because it shouldn't be that way. Every club that books somebody, there should be the agreement that, yes, we're going to treat you like a human being. It shouldn't be a thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And the fact that it's, something you have to point out makes me a little sad. But maybe I've said that now that we haven't had any live music for a couple months, and I'm going to ask you a question after this, Brooks, if you're okay with it. But this is a time to also reset and reprioritize and revalue something that we were kind of not, and by we, I mean everybody on the planet, not paying enough attention to or treating right. And by that, I mean live music and original music, right? So maybe we can kind of reset this and start over. The fact that most shows are $5 is pretty much bullshit. $10 should be the minimum. Coffee's $7.50 at Starbucks, right? So why, for 2 hours of entertainment with 3 bands or however many people you're involving. But what I wanted to ask Brooks is, you've definitely been out there and toured a bunch. What do you see? Are you hoping to pick up where you left off? Do you have other plans? Are you just waiting to see? I just don't know how much touring there's going to be, or shows, for at least a couple of months, and even that's optimistic. What do you have any thoughts on that?
It seems like musicians have been like pretty responsible for the most part, and like everybody really wanting to make sure they're on the right side of this thing, when it's all said and done, that they weren't responsible for anybody's death, that like they were participating in a way that was best for people from like a humanitarian standpoint. And so I think we're all just going to feel it out. Everybody's just like waiting until there is a consensus, and nobody knows how long that's going to take. I'm not particularly worried about it, because I know it's going to pass. I know it's going to look different when, I mean, I think it's going to look different whenever things are returned to some sort of normal. But from what I've seen so far, I think we can handle it. In the arts scene, people can handle it. There's a lot outside of that I have less faith in, but I don't think people are going to be very irresponsible with this. I'm being careful. I think a lot of the people I know that are in the same boat as me are being very careful.
Brooks, you have been a part of, like, if I think back to the shows that I've been to at Octopus that you've been a part of, there's never a time that there's a tribute night, an anniversary show, a big night that you're not part of. The respect we have for you in the Cedar Valley is amazing. What are some of your favorite shows or bands that you've caught at the Octopus stage?
Oh man. There's been so much. Like I've met a lot of like really close friends like at that venue. I've like it's been so many years, you know. So like uh there's kind of too many highlights to even mention. Like definitely all those tribute shows are amazing nights, and like everybody just like brings it whenever something like that happens. There's always like magical energy there at those shows. So those are, I mean, that's some of my favorite stuff. It's like it's usually because like somebody died or something, you know, but like, you know, or like, you know, the Dylan tributes, you know, are incredible. So it, even if it's because of something sad, like it's still like those are magical, amazing nights for sure.
Well, I was going to talk about the Dylan thing because Brooks has been a part of that for the last couple of years, and we always do like a Rolling Stone, which is a bit of a war horse. But I got to tell you, I usually end up on the acoustic guitar because I'm the host. So I'm just saying that's not the instrument I would choose to play, but I end up on that. And you know what? I have a fucking great time. And we run through the song once before Brooks gets there. And it's just, you know, and that's a show that should be taking place in about, you know, 2 weeks. But I want to tell Brooks and I want to tell everybody, we are going to do the Dylan thing. It's just going to be at a different date. The same way we're going to do St. Patrick's Day, because we're not going to let anything take it away from us. And we'll do it whenever the hell we please, right? We're in charge. You know, we're just taking a nap right now. We'll be back. And stuff like Brooks and hearing him now, and whether it be the Hex Girls or Johnny Dexter, or, you know, I'm biased. I support what's here the most because, yeah, let's be honest, it's good for me and the club, but it's also it's what it radiates out from there into Iowa and then national. And we've just been so fortunate. Ralph and I were talking about the the Octopus compilation, and there's 11 Iowa bands on there, and it's fucking crazy that 8 of those are from Cedar Falls. You know, that's just nuts. And Iowa has that running in the water. There's something in the water that we're trying to nurture and keep going.
So Dave just mentioned the Octopus Live compilation, and Brooks, you have an amazing track on there. What Kind of Man? And you were one of the, as we started to think about artists that had to be a part of what we were trying to capture at the Octopus, you were very high on that list. That track was chosen very intentionally, kind of considering the times we're in. And you seem to have so many of those songs. You're such a soft-spoken guy, but every time I sit at your show and listen to your lyrics or listen back, where does all this come from, Brooks? They're so deep. Tell us how you write these amazing songs.
Almost all my songs are just from either conversation or like just something that, like my reaction to something I read. Like a lot of, like I sit around and think a lot, and that, like, I don't know, like, because I don't necessarily want to, like, I'm not a super social guy, like a lot of the time, and don't feel very comfortable like talking to people I don't know. Like it's a challenge for me. But like I do have a way to like say the things that I have to say. I have a way to like express the thoughts that I've had, the reactions that I've had to the world that I'm living in. So like I can do that loudly and efficiently in a song, and like that's why I write songs.
I think you've just hit upon something that's so important, and I use music in a slightly different way. But what you're saying is that it's a process or a tool for you to meet people. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not very comfortable when I'm being you for a second, Brooks, and that's what music is so important is that there's so many ways you can use it in a positive manner. And I've used it the exact same way to, without music, I wouldn't have my family, I wouldn't have my business. And it's an organic, honest way to do that. And that's what I love about it. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, Brook Strause, and I look forward to booking a show with you when it's safe. So do Iowa and the Cedar Valley and the music scene a favor and continue to be safe, okay?
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to do this.
We love you, and we'll see you at some point.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Brooks.
All right, you're listening to Octopus Radio, the internet extension of Octopus, a bar and venue located in Cedar Falls, Iowa, just on the block from the University of Northern Iowa. We're here to keep the name Octopus alive and, in the local lexicon, small businesses. We're all thinking about opening again, but I really don't. The next 2 weeks are going to be a little stressful. I don't know I know there's some businesses that are straight open right now, and I don't know what to do with that. I just think it's a little too early, but I respect anybody's decision. I also respect anybody's decision to not go out.
Agreed. It's kind of a weird time, but hopefully it's, like Brooks said, he has confidence that we're going to get through this and we're going to come out on the other side better than ever and appreciate things that maybe we forgot about or that we should have appreciated more before this. DJ Pals, it's time for some music. Where are we headed?
Yeah, it sure is. Once again, I just want to express how great that was to hear Brook Strause playing some music. That is the type of thing you miss. Can't wait till we're hearing it, live and in person again. Let's take it back to the Twin Cities again. If we can get to it, we should have one queued up here from Tommy Stinson's band, Bash and Pop. We got that one ready, Ralph?
We do. Here we go. Bash and Pop. Too late.
Bash and Pop.
Talking in bed, I said it's too late to think we'll be friends.
It's too late. Too late. It's too late. I said it's too late. I said it's too late. I said it's too late. For me to fall in love with you.
I saw you juggling chainsaws. I saw you kissing crocodiles. You had no luck picking up the beads of mercury. You had no stomach for the pain in your heart. There's a new moon illuminating Babylon. There's a train carrying treasure through a desert to a dead sea. Oh, the truth reveals itself to us as a gift. We live out confusion until the road is clear. Say your name, carve it on the mountains, don't let them pass you by. What was written in the book of Psalms will be indomitable. They came bearing gifts, steel, gunpowder, pestilence. They took what they could. They made an altar, blessed it with the blood of the saints, and carved up souls, fruit, and golden praise. Say your name, carve it on the mountain, don't let them pass you by. What was written in the book of Psalms will be indomitable. Somewhere a mother holds a child nursing. The bound is sure, the love complete. Oh, around them a village burns, the dead are counted. The bells are ringing for the souls on their journey home. Say your name, carve it on the mountain, don't let them pass you by. What was written in the book of Psalms will be indomitable. Indomitable.
This is Anthony Warden, the Illiterati.
And you're listening to Octopus Radio.
All right, Bob Dylan with his version of I Shall Be Released. I think he recorded that later. I think he actually recorded that after the band did the song with Happy Traum. Anyway, I Shall Be Released, Bob Dylan. I like his own version of it. I really do. It's a little less overwrought than the band doing it. Prior to that, we heard another Minnesota band, the Honey Dogs, featuring Adam Levy. Adam has performed here in a couple different capacities. I know he played at Stebbs, I believe, as the Honey Dogs, but definitely with the Picadors, and has done a house show here in the Cedar Valley, and has expressed interest, I hear, in playing Octopus with one of his projects in the future. Hopefully that can happen. Adam, or I beg your pardon, the Honey Dogs with a song that applies to us all, Indomitable. And we started off the set with Bash and Pop featuring Nicole Atkins doing It's Too Late.
Ralph, did you ever see, or Brian, did you guys see Bash and Pop in person? Or
I have not seen Bash and Pop in person, sadly. In a long list of great post replacements records, I would say Bash and Pop's Friday Night Is Killing Me is probably at the top of my list. I deeply love that record. So glad it was re-released on vinyl, and beyond glad that Tommy Stinson played a house show where Brian is sitting right now. A few years ago, that was a deeply meaningful show to me, to see Tommy in my town just across the street in somebody's living room. That was a wow, what a night.
well, he also played at Reverb,
Yeah, yeah,
and that was a little disappointing show for the turnout.
yeah.
But Bob, and then a guy, I think his name was Dave, who had played with Frank Black, was his partner at that show. And I saw Bash and Pop in Austin, and I was kind of, when you're at South by Southwest, when it's really kicking ass, you just want to have a place to sit. Well, I was at a bar just sitting, and there was some free booze and stuff. And then somebody's like, "Oh, Bash and Pop is playing." I was like, "Fantastic," because I wasn't planning on moving anyway. And it's 100 fucking degrees out, and you've been drinking since noon. And they put on a fantastic show, and they blew a breaker.
Yeah.
In the show, and Tommy kept playing, and then, of course, walking on tables and stuff. But it was memorable and it was fun.
I'm remembering that Reverb show, which I recorded, by the way. He doesn't know that, but I'm sure he's good with it. And Tommy did kind of do the same thing where he got up on the bar at the old Reverb, and he sang "Come On, Get Happy" by the Partridge Family, which takes us back to our interview with Bob, where he talked about the impact of those songs on them as kids. And that was a ton of fun. What a great show.
I think that what we've brought up here, something is about the Reverb and Spicoli's, which has ceased doing business in the last week. That we need to do a show or a segment, maybe as a part of a larger thing about live music in the Cedar Valley. But they certainly played a very large and very important part in the live music history of the Cedar Valley. And I haven't even, it's a little weird when you run a club. You don't really go over to other clubs all the time like you used to, you know what I'm saying? Because you're just kind of, it's just a thing. So I feel a little bit removed from it, but I am not removed from how important and how much good work they did here in the Cedar Valley. And it's not good for any of us, including the Octopus, that they are now gone. So we should pay attention to that and brainstorm on what we could do to do a series on Reverb. And I think they were around for like 15 or 16 years. Is that sound right?
Yeah,
it does. Yep.
Yeah. So cheers to the Reverb and everybody involved in that. And it's a tough business. So with the stuff that's going on now, it becomes just ridiculous. So
I would agree, Dave. That would be a great segment. Speaking of cheers, our good friend and former co-host, Audrey Robinson, must be in town. As I'm sitting here during the show, get a message from her that she has dropped off some goodies on my front doorstep. And I sent my family to check, and I got a couple of crowlers from Little Thistle. And in my hand right now, I have something called, it's an IPA, and it is called a Maplewood IPA, a chip off the old hop. And that was her way of saying, I'm sorry I can't give you a Strata Galactica, which is my favorite Little Thistle beer, but holy cow, this is a great beer. Thank you, Audrey Robinson, for being our friend.
she texted me a couple of days ago, and unfortunately I told her I was going to be at my house. So I'm at the bar right now. So and she said she was going to do some no contact beer drop off. So we really want to thank Audrey for thinking of us. I'm thinking she's down here to visit her mom and stuff. So
yeah,
be safe, Audrey, and we love you. And we need to do a Zoom with Audrey maybe next week.
Yes, that'd be amazing.
Yep. I'm hoping I have some beer sitting on my porch. I'm hoping I have some beer and not a taco pizza.
DJ Pals, what music would we like to hear next?
What do we got queued up? I've been wanting to get to this one. Somebody else that we lost in the past week, this year-long week that we've been through, is somebody that's important to me anyway. And it's actually a record I play at the bar. I play this at the bar fairly frequently. I'm into the Stranglers. The Stranglers were a band that was kind of affiliated with the first wave punk rock movement. I don't necessarily think of them as a punk rock band, but they were there. You know, they toured with the Sex Pistols, and anyway, the keyboard player with the Stranglers, Dave Greenfield, passed away from COVID complications this week. So pretty sad about that. Interesting band though. Out of all the bands of that era, out of all the first wave punk bands, they were the least guitar oriented. The main sounds that you hear in the Stranglers are they had a kick-ass bass player, J.J. Burnell, and a kick-ass keyboard player, Dave Greenfield. Rest in power, man. Walk on by the Stranglers.
If you see me walking down the streets and I start to cry each time we meet, walk on by. I walk on by and make believe that I can see the tears that let me breathe. I'm private, 'cause each time I see you, I just wanna cry. I walk on by. I walk on losing you, and so if I seem so broken in pieces, walk on by. Oh, walk on by. And foolish pride, if I can't see the tears, then let me hide all the tears and the sadness you give me when you say goodbye. Oh, walk on by. Oh, walk on for a stroll in the trees.
This is Kaylee tuning in from Waterloo, and you are listening to Octopus Radio.
Watch the road from where I sit, scratching pictures in the dirt with a pointed stick, like a rabbit run, like a bobwhite fly, like a blackbird drawing circles in the sky.
This is Nutty John Fisher, and you are listening to Octopus Radio.
Got a little ahead of myself. Sorry. Got an ID snuck in there that I wasn't hoping for. Go ahead, Brian.
It's always time for some Nutty John Fisher. John D. Graham, Big Canal. I think a fitting conclusion to where we're headed here. And prior to that, the Stranglers. The Stranglers with the Burt Bacharach song, Walk On By.
I think that song illustrates one of the reasons that they were not totally accepted within the punk scene.
Yeah.
The correct song. And they were also, 7 to 10 years older than their contemporaries. Having said that, those first two Strangler records are still essential listening. Maybe beyond that, but that's the two I have. And that sounded good, but you can tell they're clearly not coming from where the Sex Pistols are coming from at all.
Yeah, for sure. The guy, Dave Greenfield, the keyboard player that passed away, he had a mustache.
Yeah. The Greg Norton of English punk.
Right.
Yeah. If you have a mustache with a swirl on the end of it, you're clearly saying fuck you to the punk scene.
Sorry about that. That's me trying to get a track ready.
Did you get ahead of yourself again, Ralph?
Ahead of myself. I did not pull out the cable, however.
Oh, shit. Well, did we listen to something before that? I'm starting to lose track in my brain.
No, just the two tracks. The Stranglers track was long. So
I want to thank everybody for listening. This has been quite the night and quite the experience having Brook Strause here, having Bob Mehr with talking about the Replacements from was it Nashville or Memphis, Ralph?
Memphis, Tennessee.
Memphis, Tennessee. So he's a freelance writer working out of Memphis?
He works at a paper called the Commercial Appeal in Memphis. That's his day job. And then he does writing for things like Mojo, Magnet, Spin.
I have to look. I'm sure I've read his work. I just haven't looked at the byline to see it.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah, absolutely, you have.
I subscribe to Mojo, so I'm sure I've read some of his work.
Yeah.
Very intelligent, smart, nice guy. So that was just fantastic. And then talking to Matthew Wilson about the secret history of the Cedar Valley, some things have really come together for us. I think, not being in the same room and having to think about what the program is has really yielded some positive benefits that we're going to bring to the show when we are all back in the same room. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also excited that I think this was a record number of listeners at one time on Zoom. So thank you. And once again, this is Octopus, which is Octopus Radio, an extension of Octopus the Bar in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And we really appreciate you listening and spending some time with us this afternoon. I think we have one more tune. Is that what we're looking at? And then saying goodbye?
Yeah, I would like to play one more tune. Our good friends and twins are going to release a new single this week from their upcoming record, Dream On. And we listened to Buffalo Snow last week when we had the show. And I'd sure like to play their new single. It's called So Far Gone. And I think what we'll do is come out of that and kind of wrap up. But I'd like to play the world premiere of their single. It is called So Far Gone, our good friends and twins.
Open their mouth and nothing comes out. Yeah, it's a fine line to dance, holding these spinning plates on the white hot stage. Just a fan in the flame. Well, any explanation would be nice. So far gone. Well, I know sometimes it gets pretty mean in an ugly old world. The same thing. It's a prime time scam behind a glowing screen. It's a pumped up little scene. It's a dying dream. Well, any explanation would be nice. We're far across the line, and we're so far gone. So far gone. It was so far gone. So far gone. It was 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 so far gone.
All right, that was our friends twins. I'll try to get this right. I've been screwing it up in chat all night. The song is So Far Gone. The album is called Dream On. I believe it's coming out on June 5th. It is available for pre-order right now, and I'm going to highly recommend you grab it right away. I've had the test press all of the pandemic, and I have listened to it many, many times.
And to be clear, that's available on vinyl.
Available on vinyl. I think they're going to do CD as well. You choose what how you'd like to grab it, but grab it. You will not regret it.
I completely agree, and I can't wait. The Twins are one of those bands that, not the Twins, but one of those bands that when I picture the moving forward from the pandemic and COVID-19 are a band that I think about being at the show where they're playing. It's kind of a homecoming, so I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but we will book it, Thanks for listening to Octopus Radio. We're about done here for tonight. I'm going to say it one last time. Thanks to Bob Mehr for joining us and talking about the replacements, and I want to thank Matthew Wilson for talking about the history of the Cedar Valley, and he's going to be back next week, I hope. And Brook Strause did a fantastic job. What a great, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, honestly. And it's going to get crazier because next week we're going to talk to Carl Alvarez, the bass player for the Descendants. And Carl has an interesting history that's kind of tied around Salt Lake City, Utah. He started out as a guy making posters and ended up in, one of the bigger punk bands of the last 20 years, right? And he's a sweetheart too, so we're looking forward to talking to him. And that will be what's the date? May 13th. 16th.
Yep.
Saturday the 16th at 7 p.m. So Carl's going to join us from his home just outside of Fort Collins, Colorado. So that'll be fantastic. And then as far as Octopus Radio, Mohair Pear will be doing another record club and online sale on Wednesday. So if you're not doing anything, please join us. We'd love to hang out with you. Ralph, Brian, I loved seeing you guys' faces on my computer screen, and it's great hearing your voices, and I love you both. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave. Support artists. Support artists out there. Support music. Tonight was such a great illustration of why that's so necessary.
I think Brooks hit us right in the feels, man. I'm telling you right now, that was incredible. We needed that. And thank you to Bob, and thank you to Matthew. I agree. So our tradition on this Zoom version has been to unmute everybody and see what happens. Holy cow, here we go. So we're going to do, I hear some laughing out there, and there needs to be some laughing.
Okay.
How many times do we chant, Ralph?
Here we go. We do it 5 times, and then I go into our theme song. Here we go, all, the biggest cluster of them all. 1, 2, 3.
Octopus Radio.
Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio. Nice job tonight, guys. A lot of fun.